We begin tonight, though, with a report on the GM recall. Incompetence and neglect, but no cover-up. That's what GM CEO Mary Barra says were some of the key findings of the independent report into the deadly ignition switch recall. The report was conducted by attorney Anton Valukas. Barra says Valukas interviewed 230 employees and reviewed, get this, 41 million documents.
What Valukas found in this situation was a pattern of incompetence and neglect. Repeatedly, individuals failed to disclose critical pieces of information that could have fundamentally changed the lives of those impacted by the faulty ignition switch. If this information had been disclosed, and I believe this in my heart, the company would have dealt with this situation much differently and appropriately.
To refresh your memory, here's how we got here. In February of this year, General Motors started recalling Chevy Cobalts, Saturn Ions, and other small cars because of a problem with the ignition switch. The switch could slip out of the run position, and that disables power steering, power brakes, and airbags. At issue is when GM first found out about the defect. The report says GM knew something was wrong as far back as 2002. General Motors admits that at least 13 people have died in crashes because of the faulty ignition switch. Trial attorneys and at least one news outlet put the death toll much, much higher.
Joining me now to help make sense of the latest developments are Joan Claybrook, who used to run the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, attorney Bob Hilliard, who represents the families of some of the victims, and Wall Street Journal reporter Neil Bodett. Neil, I'm going to start with you and a question about new information we're finding from this report today, that engineers originally decided that the problem with the ignition switches were simply an issue of convenience, not safety. Tell us more about that.
That's correct. Throughout the report, they make clear that almost all throughout the entire process, from 2003, 2004 up to today, that GM viewed this as not a safety issue, that if the car switches into the off position, the power goes off, the engine stops running, you could still steer it, you could still use the brakes and bring the car to a halt. So they did not view that as a safety concern, and convenience is the word that they would attach to it. They would say it's a customer convenience matter.
Wow.
And so they handled it not with the urgency that you would with a serious safety issue.
That's shocking. And of course, Ray DiGiorgio, who is the engineer at the center of all this, apparently there was knowledge very early in this that before the cars even went on the market, that there was a problem. How can that be true?
Well, it is. This engineer by the name of Ray DiGiorgio was in charge of the switch development as the cars were being prepared in the early 2000s, and they had multiple problems. There were some electrical issues with the switch, but also the mechanical one where it could slip into the off position, and at one point he referred to it as the switch from hell in an email to the supplier. And so they knew that he knew this was a faulty part, and in the end he approved it, even though it did not meet GM's specifications in terms of the amount of force you need to turn the key.
Well, shocking revelations from the report. We're still getting shocking revelations. Joan, to you, you've been involved in regulation since the 1960s. You were on board with Ralph Nader. What did you make of today's revelations?
Well, the key thing to me is that there is no accountability inside General Motors, and that I find shocking. And so there are all these committees, and people never take any minutes, so they don't have to be responsible, and things shift back and forth here and there all over this enormous company, and there's no system for making sure they come to closure on an issue. Also, this calling stalling a convenience issue is ridiculous. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration has called stalling problems a safety issue since back in the early 1970s, and indeed it was a court in a case involving a General Motors carburetor that caught fire and then the car stalled, said that stalling is a safety issue. So for them to say it's a convenience issue is shocking to me. In addition, the whole report seems to be absolving everybody, except for a few lower level people, of the responsibility for making sure that defects are properly considered and that recalls are instrumented. So there was even an admission that people indicate that they don't take minutes on purpose. They don't take notes at meetings, so that there is no responsibility. And it said also that the board of directors has no idea how many people are killed each year in General Motors cars. So it's like
shocking.
Everybody's off the hook. Yeah, everyone's off the hook. And I believe that the tougher that the regulator is with a company, the better the company will behave, and the better it is for the company in the long run. That they need criminal penalties in order to assure that.
Let's turn to Bob now and see what he has to say. Bob, you're representing literally scores of families who are taking action against the company because members of their family were killed in one of these cars. What surprised you most about what Mary Barra, the CEO of GM, had to say today?
It's this. At what point does incompetence and neglect transform into a cover-up? It's almost as if they're saying we were too stupid to cover it up. We didn't even understand that we had a defect. But if you create a culture where you don't have, like Joan just said, any checks and balances, how is that not the definition of a cover-up? If you keep your head in the sand, if you do it intentionally, if you know there are problems that you don't address and those problems cause death and injuries, in my view, and in the view of the folks I represent, that is a cover-up.
Neil, to you, I mean, there were lots of tough questions in what was a 2-hour press conference, I think, of Mary Barra. How seriously was she questioned? Were her feet really held to the fire? And what do you think of what Bob is saying here, that he's questioning her comments about the cover-up?
Well, the report says there is no evidence that Mary Barra herself knew about this until just very recently. So it's hard to point the finger at her. But one thing that the report does make clear is there were many, many engineers, not just the one we've mentioned, Ray DiGiorgio, many, many engineers who noticed this defect, this problem of the vehicle shutting off and raised concerns about it. The problem was it very often flowed back to Ray DiGiorgio, the guy who knew about it and approved it, and he didn't take any action. But there were many levels throughout GM from 2004 to 2014 that knew about this, but they didn't go up to the really high senior executive levels. They were engineering jobs in the proving grounds, in the technical center, and so it's hard to say that Mary Barra herself it has a lot of responsibility for this.
And what she said today is that, go right ahead, Joan.
Well, I was just going to say a key thing here is the law. The law is very clear, and General Motors has a huge legal office, and they were sued. And when that happens, the general way that General Motors handles these things is that they gather all the information together to fight the lawsuit, and in some cases settle the lawsuit if they realize that they have a problem. So I put a tremendous amount of responsibility on the lawyers going up to the chief counsel, who does report to the CEO, for not bringing this to the attention of the upper management, because there were many lawsuits filed. There's some, I don't know, 20 or 30 lawsuits filed over these years. And when they're filed, the company gathers its information and knows that there's a problem. So it's not just in one section of General Motors or another section of General Motors. They assemble the information. So I think that there's more here than has been revealed.
Bob, I want to follow up with a quick question
correct.
for you, Bob, before we go. We don't have much time. I'm wondering if anything you heard today could affect the company's bankruptcy protection, because the company, of course, has been through bankruptcy. It's come out as the new GM. Is there anything you heard today that could impact that?
Absolutely. That report will be the roadmap for the bankruptcy judge to determine who knew what and why wasn't it disclosed to him when they sought bankruptcy protection. But Jerry, it's important to put a face on what Joan just said. One of my clients had to plead guilty to a state felony jail time offense in a vehicle that GM now admits was defective. While she was going through the criminal system, the civil lawsuit that Joan just mentioned was going on, and GM actually knew it was the defect, not her conduct, that caused the accident, yet they sat on their hands and they watched quietly as she pled guilty to a felony, and she is now a convicted felon because of that.
We've got more and more to come on this story. I hope you'll all join us again. Joan, Bob, and Neil, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry. Good seeing you.
Well, we're staying on the GM story here. Joining me now by phone is Daryl Chansethis. Let me try that again. Chansethis. Her daughter was killed in one of the recalled vehicles in 2009. And Daryl, to you, I'm so sorry for your loss. Tell us, in your own words, your reaction to Mary Barra's comments today.
I was deeply affected by her comments. I mean, as I listen to her, and as I think about it now, I cry. Words that stood out for me initially were that her comment that the goal was to focus on honor, integrity, and safety. And I cried when I heard her say that, because I bought the car because I thought it was a company that had integrity, that had a sense of honor, and did care about the safety of the people who purchased the car. I was deeply saddened because I realized that was in fact not the case. The level of inhumanity was just unconscionable to me. I'm still trying to process it. It's been difficult.
I'm sure it has been difficult. Your daughter died in 2009.
Yeah.
And it's taken 11 years for the company to come to terms with this, even admit the problem. What should happen now, in your view? In my understanding, well, I think that they need to be accountable. And what I heard today is that they intend to be, but I didn't hear that their intention was to be fully accountable. I mean, their focus is on the 13 who died as a result of airbags not inflating. But way back in 2009, when this happened to my daughter, my sons believed there was more to it than that. They believed that there's something to the power and that my daughter was not able to steer. And that is, in fact, why they pursued legal action against GM to begin with. That the airbags also did not inflate and the seatbelt did not lock to help prevent her death was secondary to what they felt. The primary, that in fact that there was a defect and they didn't know what it was, but that something had happened that caused her to lose power and to lose control of the car and ultimately to crash. Daryl, I believe we still have Bob Hilliard, who is your attorney in this case,
yes,
with us. Bob, if you would, more details about this case. So another situation where airbags did not deploy, the seatbelt did not lock. Tell us more about the events of that day.
Well, this case represents a unique situation that I face with many clients, and that is GM actively committed fraud in the civil case by not providing the information to allow us to find out that this was a defective vehicle. They wanted to blame the driver. They wanted to threaten the family that it would be the driver, this Daryl's daughter, who was to blame, while at the same time not providing the information about the defects. So the case was settled. You know, we're going to refile this lawsuit because GM's attorneys have an independent duty to be sure that the information they provide us through the legal process is accurate and it's complete. So either GM was not giving it to their attorneys in this case, or GM's local attorneys were involved in the cover-up. Only one of those two things can be true, because we were never provided the information that GM actually had, that this was a result of the defective vehicle, and that's the only reason this accident occurred.
The revelations just keep on coming. Daryl, thank you. Yes. Bob Hilliard, thank you for coming on the show tonight, and we will continue to follow your story. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.